every society has been storytellers in some way, shape, or form, whether it's to better understand ourselves in this world, whether it's to encourage other people to have a voice, whether it's to promote an emotion.
Stephanie Gardner, it's lovely to have you on Underexposed. You have undertaken an incredible project. You visited 33 countries, you've traveled almost 3 million miles, and you've interviewed a lot of young filmmakers in each of these countries. The show is called Cinema Nomad. It debuts on PBS.org on May 1st. Stephanie, welcome.
Thank you. Yeah, so let me just give you the basic background of the project and show.
Please.
I'm happy to be here, Alex. Thanks for having me as well. I love what you're doing with Underexposed. So, I'm an independent filmmaker, writer, director, usually just art house narrative short films. And as I was approaching my 33rd birthday, I decided I wanted to travel the world to over 33 countries to meet and get to know other film directors my age, who would be approximately 33 years old. And so I embarked on this odyssey, which ended up being an over 6 year journey, and met and interacted with film directors in their 30s from all these different countries in every corner of the world, to learn about their lives, careers, cultures, what makes them tick, what motivates them to tell their stories, and why, and how do they overcome obstacles. And it was really inspiring. And we made a television series, a arts and culture focused international travel docu-series, which, as you kindly mentioned, will be premiering on May 1st. It'll be found on PBS.org, but also on public television stations across the country and the World Channel as well.
I wonder if you could tell us a little in more detail who you were before you started this project, and were you a traveler? What inspired you to take on this journey?
Yeah, I definitely always had the travel bug, I would say. So I think, a part of it might be that bug to keep traveling, an excuse to travel. I always identified myself as a writer, and I started in theater from a very early age. I wrote plays. Then I fell in love with music and started writing musical comedies. At first, the music, the lyrics, the book, everything. And then I started collaborating with better musicians than myself. And then, so I went from musical theater to straight theater and ended up going to a master's program through NYU Tisch, but a program they started in Singapore, Tisch Asia, which probably also helped spark my interest in travel as well because I got to fairly easily bounce around Southeast Asia during those 2 years in Singapore. And I was in the writing department there, but I fell in love with cinema, because NYU is such a heavy film program that even though I was in as a playwright, I got exposed to all the filmmakers and the cinema world, and I ended up concentrating on screenwriting, moving back to New York, buying a video camera, and just deciding to try my luck at directing movies, and I just loved it. And so that's kind of the spark. I mean, since then, I left Singapore, I want to say in 2010. Since then, I've been making movies nonstop, and it's just been a passion.
It's just fascinating to consider who you might have been when you started this journey and who you might be now, having visited with all these filmmakers and seen all these different cinematic ecosystems that exist across the world. I'm wondering if you could give us a little preview of some of the ones that struck you.
Yeah, I mean the question of who I was and who I am and where I'm going is a harder question, and I think that's one that is part of the project, is an exploration for both me on this journey, but also each of the film directors in their own lives. And a lot surprised me. I mean, in terms of cinema cultures, I guess what surprises most people when I talk about it is that there is such a big cinema culture in so many different countries around the world. A lot of people ask me, well, how could you even find a 30-something-year-old film director in all these different countries? But each one of them had at least one, usually many, many more than just one. And they're making these incredible films, that maybe have a different look and feel than what we're used to in Hollywood or in European art house cinema or whatnot. but they're telling stories just like you and me, and they're making it happen, and they're using this, similar visual techniques and using their creativity and their grit. And so I think the biggest surprise for a lot of people has been just that there is so much cinema around the world that we don't even know about necessarily over here. Um, Places like Uzbekistan, Azerbaijan, I had almost never heard of before going there. When I told a lot of my friends, "Oh, I'm off to Azerbaijan," they said, "Azerbaijan what?" And so that was kind of a neat part of the process too, was to, discover these places for myself as well that we're not always exposed to information about them over here, but to then be able to share what I learned with my networks and friends back home and with the other 33 filmmakers, because that's been a really neat part of the project as well. Is I've tried to create this network, this community where they are interacting with each other as well. So, my filmmaker in Guyana got to meet my filmmaker in, say, Romania, and they got to share information about their own countries as well.
I want to touch on this idea of this constellation of filmmakers in these different countries. Are you seeing a common denominator in what its characteristics are and its role in these societies is?
Yeah, and I think the act of filmmaking itself, the art of it is the same, the process is the same wherever you're making films. Some of the differences might be within the individual challenges, but even many of the challenges are the same in terms of like the first thing a filmmaker will tell you is that money funding is the hardest part of it. That's the biggest challenge. The second one is often distribution. How do I get my film seen once I've made it? That's a pretty common problem too. However, once you go deeper and deeper, some of the societal problems or some of the individual challenges vary from censorships to restrictions to lack of resources to personal problems. And there's lots of other differences there. Um, the the similarities in terms of like I think the motivation to make the films, why people are making the films. I One thing that's really inspired me about the project is how much cinema and film culture has had an impact on so many societies throughout the ages. And it may not be conscious at the time it's being made. Sometimes it is. Sometimes filmmakers are going out there and saying, "Oh, I want to, be an activist and tell a story that like promotes social justice and human rights and things like that." And some of our filmmakers are very clear about that goal. Others are just making films to entertain. But conscious or not, these films are speaking to people in their communities. They're often giving a voice to places that don't always see themselves on screen. A lot of the filmmakers we encountered, and that was another big surprise in the trip, was there were so many more places we encountered that restricted like the ability to have free speech versus allowed for it. And a lot of these filmmakers are facing, how do I tell the story I want to tell and still get it shown and not censored or still get it past, whatever requirements I need to get it out to the public and still have a voice for my people. So I think again, whether it's conscious or not, it's had this common theme of every society has been storytellers in some way, shape, or form, whether it's to better understand ourselves in this world, whether it's to encourage other people to have a voice, whether it's to promote an emotion. One other thing that really fascinated me was historically how relevant cinema has been. You look at places like Cuba, Ghana, the Soviet Union. We did countries in the former Yugoslavia. In so many places, cinema was used as a tool by the people in power to either help shape a national identity, to help kind of create a culture and identity, like in Yugoslavia when they were coming out of World War II, or to help kind of promote the ideology of the government, such as in Cuba, post-revolution. So there are so many ways that cinema has shaped and sometimes even rewritten history for better or worse to give a nation a certain ideology. I mean, the US does it as well. I mean, we could study the whole history of cinema in Hollywood and the ideologies that happen throughout the decades as well. Sometimes it's very deliberate, other times it's not. But I found that interesting.
Very interesting. I had a pleasure of seeing the Bosnia and Herzegovina episode. What it fulfills to me is not only am I learning about a filmmaker, I'm learning about a country and a history and the history of cinema within that country and the interplay between those politics and the development of the nation.
That episode's
Yeah.
interesting to me because it kind of shows how cinema shaped like a mythology for the whole country and their history and how they wanted to remember the history. But then as the war in the 90s happened, so much of the cinema became about, the siege on Sarajevo or the Bosnian War that the filmmakers kind of got boxed in to having to tell that story because that's what Europe and the festivals and the funders expect out of a film from Bosnia. And our filmmaker who survived the war as a child really used it as like a tool to try to understand, to try to process why this happened, what this happened. She actually studies hundreds of war films that have been made um, in the former Yugoslavia to now, and it's her way of trying to like kind of find catharsis or process or understand what happened. And I think that's also a very powerful thing.
So, of all the countries that you visited, if you had to choose one to produce a film in yourself, your next film, but you need to work within a certain country, one of the 33 that you visited, which would you choose and why?
I would say Iceland, simply for the ease and comfortability of it. They have a small but mighty film crew there. Everybody knows everybody who works in the film industry there. They're very willing to lend a hand. They have the support structure to make a film there. It's beautiful. It's nice. So off the top of my head, Iceland came to mind. Um, but I mean, there are lots of places I would want to make films, but not always for practical reasons. So, I mean, most studio films or foreign films that go to shoot in a country choose the country that has the best tax incentives. And Romania, of the countries we went to, has a very good tax structure and also a very big studio system for filmmaking. So Romania might be a more obvious choice. Plus Teddy, our filmmaker there, he's the best, so it would just be a delight. Um, but then places like, Uzbekistan and Azerbaijan are so visually interesting. Um, I personally love South America. Bolivia was one of my favorite countries that we visited. Um, but that, they don't necessarily have that support structure built in, but I'm an independent filmmaker. I go where my heart tells me to, I guess.
What episodes are you most excited to share with people?
Oh gosh, it depends on the day and the hour. I mean,
What about
because
right now? What about right now?
be-
What are you excited about?
right now I'm excited about Uganda, because that's one that we're finishing up the cuts of, and it's so unique and different from some of the other places we visited. Our filmmaker, their patience is just uh, a a force of a woman who's, making waves in her East African society. She's really passionate about the themes she talks about. She covers a variety of topics that are sometimes difficult to talk about in Uganda. And it's a beautiful country. It's got great wildlife, great landscapes. So I'm really excited about that one, like right now, because I just sent notes to my editor for the next cut, so that one's on my mind. Cambodia is going to be a really interesting episode. Um, Again, a country that has to deal with recent trauma, like modern history traumas, and yet it's one of the friendliest, most fun, nicest countries to visit, and it's beautiful. I love the filmmakers we interacted with there, so. Uh, they're all my favorites. It's like having a very large family of kids and that you can't pick a favorite.
Are there countries that you were not able to visit that you're desperate to visit in a future installment?
Yes, for a lot of reasons, there are different countries we weren't able to visit that I'd love to do. Iran is the obvious choice for me. They have an amazing cinema culture there. It's very difficult for a US citizen to visit Iran. Not impossible though, but difficult. Other countries, so we're trying to do a Bhutan episode, possibly if we can connect with the right filmmakers there. We're trying to do a Mongolia episode.
You mentioned funding earlier, and it begs the question, how are you able to keep the wheels on this truck going, reaching for a
Our,
meta? How are you able to fund this if you're comfortable sharing?
we only have 2.5 wheels. We like push the truck down the rocky road, but no. Um, well, just like any project, it's hard, it's stressful, it's, a day-to-day thing that we're just praying the next thing comes through and just like kind of blindly, faithfully leaping forward. But we've been lucky. So early on, when it just started, it was just a spark of idea in my head. I pooled my meager savings, and fortunately, my partner, my significant other, Tiz, who's also in the film industry, he decided to join me from day one to go on this trip, which totally changed how it worked. Like if it was just me traveling and doing this project, I'd probably have a small handheld camera and just go and film what I could. I'm not really a camera person though. But Tiz, who is, came, he pulled his savings, so we kind of just pulled resources for the first few trips. And once we filmed some things, put together some teasers and started fundraising, very grassroots. I like to throw parties, invite people over, show them the work. And eventually we decided to start an LLC. So we did it more like old school, independent feature film funding, where we actually built an investment structure. So we got an LLC. I have to say it took me a long time, probably a year, to figure out all the legalities of it, how to do it properly and appropriately, but we did it. And over the next few years, we slowly got individual investors who just were passionate about the project, who have invested their money in the LLC.
We have to touch on PBS and what's recently been brewing and what your thoughts are on what that portends for the future, not only for your project, for public TV in general. Do you have any thoughts you can share with us?
Yeah, I mean, person and for people who may not know what we're talking about, there is a movement by some in the government or Congress that want to kind of take PBS out of government funding. I guess that's the basis of it. It's being attacked somewhat ideologically, which doesn't really make sense to me, but it's also just saying, well, why are we funding public television? So that's what we're talking about. My experiences have been, they've been really open and interested in quality content, interested in the content in general, interested in positive educational storytelling. And all those things can sometimes be rare when you're talking about the larger industry, and trying to pitch your projects, at an American film market or, to a streamer or whatnot. Like it's more about the back end, like how much money is this going to make, how much buzz or whatnot, and that's not what the public television sphere cares about. So that was actually refreshing. So I'm really happy to have a home where they actually care about my content. Over the years, I guess PBS and public television and public radio has faced, issues of government shutdown. There's even a West Wing episode. We're watching the 25th anniversary of West Wing. There's a West Wing episode about it where Toby Ziegler, the communications officer in the show, like has to defend against people in Congress who want to shut down PBS. So I thought that was funny. So it's not a new problem. It's just a little more um everything is losing funding right now. And as a country, we actually don't fund the arts very much at all.
Mhm.
In many places around the world, especially in Western Europe, you see much more funding and support from the government to the arts. So I think we should be doing more of that, not less of that. But in the end, I do think public TV will survive. I think there's a need for it. I think there's people value it. And as long as the rhetoric doesn't convince people who already value it that they shouldn't value it, then I think it can survive. It They might have to get creative about how they continue to fund. Some of the stations already rely on mostly private funding. Others rely more heavily on the government funding. It just depends on where the location is. The ones that rely more government funding are gonna struggle and maybe even have to shut down, and that's really sad.
And where can people find it? Regardless, you have a website that people should be aware of. Can you let us know where to find?
Yes. So, our website is cinemanomad.tv. We're building it up as we speak, but it's ultimately going to be a companion piece to the show. There'll be educational resources to learn more about each country and the cinema of each country and the filmmakers we feature. So, um, once it's really up and running in the form we want it in, I think it'll be a really nice um, resource for filmmakers or anyone interested in the world and cinema.